Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome back to some more StarCraft 2. Today we're gonna be having a look at two games that Nerchio played in the Dreamhack Valencia Grand Finals last weekend. Now I'm gonna go ahead and spoil the results right here, so if you haven't watched them just yet, Nerchio ended up winning the Grand Finals in a 4-0 fashion, not dropping a single game in a best of 7, which is absolutely ridiculous, in particular considering Marinelord before this finals had not actually dropped a single map himself yet. So Nerchio absolutely stomping the finals, and I think it has to do with a clash of styles. Basically, Marinelord plays a very harassment-heavy style where he tries to deny the economy of the Zerg player for a very long time. Nerchio, however, he plays a lot of video games. He is currently, as of me making this video, rank 1 Grandmaster in Europe, and he's been playing this game professionally, as far as I'm aware at the very least, since 2010. When I first started playing StarCraft, Nerchio was already around, and while he hadn't had the biggest amount of results, or like the best results in between, he definitely has always been a force to be reckoned with, and while he ended up winning another tournament just last weekend. Now, while watching the Grand Finals myself live as well, I realized, I'm gonna pause the game for just a little bit by the way, I realized that he is playing the same build over and over and over again. He doesn't do any kind of Overlord scouting. I mean, a lot of Zerg players right now go for the 3.5 minute Overlord scout in the main base to check out what the Terran player is going for. Instead, he is just doing the same build pretty much in every single game with a couple of minor deviations depending on the map that he's playing on. For the most part, today we're gonna be looking at two games, right? For the most part, he is playing the same strategy all the time. And I figured that would be a very interesting subject to discuss because while I don't personally speaking have the worst ZVT, there's a lot that I can learn from this as well. I mean, he plays at a far higher level than I do. So there's a lot that we hopefully can learn from this, and hopefully this will give at the very least a couple of ideas that you can go ahead and implement in your own game as well. So like I said, he does a very similar build in every single game, and it starts off with the hatchery into the gas geyser into the spawning pool. Not very weird right there. But on top of that, he doesn't really scout very heavily. He focuses a lot on creep spread, and he focuses very heavily on late game. You remember when I would be talking about, you know, going for the +1/+1 timing attacks and the +2/+2 timing attacks? Well, over time, there has been a shift in the Zerg versus Terran meta, where the Zerg player is just simply trying to get to Hive tech, where they get the most insane upgrades. And that's exactly what Nerchio is going to be playing. He's basically saying to Marinelord, okay, you can attack whatever you would like to do. Like, you can move out, you can do dropships, you can do Liberator play, you can push whenever you would like to, but I'm going to be holding all of your attacks anyway. There's not going to be a single moment where I'm going to be vulnerable, and if I mess up, for example, because a Widow Mine drops into my mineral line, that is a mistake that I take into account. That is a mistake by me, right? And I guess if you play enough games, at some point you become so good at defending all of this kind of harassment that you're gonna be able to deal with basically everything that the Terran player will be able to throw at you, at which point you can focus on the late game. And we see that shift really clearly right here in Nerchio. He's gonna be focusing on a very late game style. Now, what we see in the early part of the game right here, we see him go for 4 queens every single game. He's going for 4 queens no matter what. So that means he starts up 1 in the main and 1 in the natural. And then once those finish, he starts up another 2. Once he reaches 100 gas and the spawning pool finishes, he pulls 2 drones out of gas. And the reason for that is very standard as well, to get a couple more minerals so you can get the 3rd base started a little bit earlier. Now, in the early part of the game, he's gonna make 4 Zerglings, 4 queens, and he pulls the drones out of gas while starting up the link speed. Now, Nerchio does some very particular unit timings. He goes for 4 Zerglings every single time in the early part of the game. This is gonna be not just to ward away any kind of Reaper play on this particular map though, he's also gonna be using those links to take down these rocks. So, very important to note, he goes for 4 links pretty much no matter what. I've not seen him go for any more or any less in any of the Zerg vs Terran games that I watched him play. So 4 links and 4 queens is gonna be his early game defense. Now, as far as the 3rd base timing goes, he is gonna go ahead and get a relatively early 3rd base up. He wants to be getting that one right when he hits the full saturation in the natural. And with full saturation, I mean getting the full mineral saturation right here. So that means 16 workers on the minerals, while he already has the full right here in the natural. So keep in mind, he's not making any excessive amounts of units here whatsoever. He didn't go for any kind of drone scouting, or I believe he didn't go for any kind of drone scouting. No, he didn't. He just poked in with the Overlords. He got some good Overlord spread here to scout any kind of incoming drops and all that, but he's primarily just doing his own game. Now there's a second set of Zerglings that he makes right when Zergling speed is about to finish. So Zergling speed is done right now, and that is where he adds on 4 Merlings. He does this every single game. I'm assuming this is going to be just in case like 2 Hellions or so pop up and he's going to be able to surround those. But he does this every single game. He does not deviate from this plan whatsoever. When Zergling speed is about to finish up, he adds on 4 Zerglings. In this particular case, he's going to help them, or he's going to use them to knock down the debris right here. But this is what he does, right? So at this point in time, he is at fully saturated, or he's fully saturated in the natural. He is going to be having 16 minerals, or 16 drones on minerals right here, and he's starting up the insane creep spread. So keep in mind, he's got 4 queens right now. He's going to be spreading creep all over the map. Actually, a slight little mess up right here I noticed on the queen. Having a little bit too much energy. But when he hits full saturation in the main as well as in the natural, that is where he adds on the 3rd base. Now once the 3rd base hits, and you gotta keep in mind, until right now he's barely made any units, he's gonna add on the Roach Warren as well as an evolution chamber shortly after. And as you can see, the Roach Warren goes down right after hitting up the natural. Now, or the 3rd base rather. Now here is where he deviates a little bit depending on the map. At the very least, it seems like he deviates depending on the map. He goes for sometimes he goes for the Roach Warren before putting down the 3rd base. But it is, in most cases, he seems to be putting down the Roach Warren as well as the 3rd base roughly around the same time. And shortly after starting up the Roach Warren, he also adds on an evolution chamber right there to start up upgrading a little bit earlier on into the game as well, if it turns out to be necessary. Now, one thing to note is that while this is all going on, right? While this is all going on, he queued up a couple of overlords and he's also stacking up a bunch of minerals. He is not really rushing out any more drones right now for the time being. And the reason for that is simple. He's gonna start one very big round of roaches right when the Roach Warren finishes. So notice right now, right? No shenanigans here whatsoever. Well, we see a little bit of aggression here from the Terran player. If you're good enough, you're gonna be able to deal with all of this kind of things relatively easily. And he defends it, and he's gonna go ahead and just simply, you know, he's just simply gonna go ahead and lose very, very little amounts of workers. Now, in every single game, after the Roach Warren finishes, he usually saves up minerals to make roughly 6 to 8 roaches. He makes 6 to 8 roaches right when the Roach Warren finishes, just to defend against everything, and off of those units, so right now he's got 6 roaches, and he's still got the 8 links or so that he made earlier. Yep, there we go, he's still got the 8 links. Off of those units, he's gonna drone up 3 bases fully. So very important note, right? He does a very minimal amount of army, and he's using that army to the maximum of his capabilities. So in case the Terran player is gonna drop, he's gonna be right on top of it. And you gotta make sure that you're obviously gonna be right on top of it as well. Because this is a relatively immobile army other than the Zerglings. You gotta make sure that the positioning is gonna be great. And as far as positioning goes, as you see, he's moving the roaches around here. And he's positioning where they're gonna be most useful. Now the creep spread is obviously crucial, right? He's got creep spread pretty much everywhere to deal with the immobility of his army. But off of this, he is going for the max saturation on the 3 bases. At this point in time, we see the shift towards the Lair. So he goes for the Lair after getting this small amount of army and while droning up. He also will be adding on a 2nd evolution chamber very shortly. I don't actually exactly know where he makes it, but he's gonna go for the +1 armor here first, and then he adds on the +1 melee as well. Now, he's gonna be going for the melee upgrades, right? Even though his early to mid-game army is consisting of mostly roaches and a couple of ravagers as well. And this is relatively interesting because, as you may imagine, you know, melee upgrades are not gonna be it's not gonna be really helping out his roach ravager army. And the simple reason for that is that, once again, he's focusing on a late-game composition. He's not even attacking across the map. He never really moves out, other than with a couple of links. I mean, remember those 8 links he made earlier? I guess they made their way to the other side of the map and they started harassing a little bit, which is just a sign of a very great player. He's moving them out right at the perfect time when he knows the Terran player is going to be moving out as well. And he buys himself a little bit of time with that. So this is not to be overlooked by any stretch of the imagination, but this is very difficult to implement it to your own game. He makes sure that he gets the big economy up, and then he starts non-stop unit production. So this particular case, you can see he did a nice little run by here to deal with the aggression. He's even gonna, allow the Terran player to shoot at a couple of his own SCVs. And all in all, a couple of workers were killed, but it's mostly just a slowdown of the Terran push that, was going to be moving out across the map very, very shortly. Now, while this is going on, right? While this is going on, he also managed to hit the full saturation in the third base, as well as in the main, as well as in the natural. As you can see, he also added on the extra gases, and he's going for the upgrades right now. But either way, long story short, he's going for melee upgrades in order to make sure that he gets the strongest late game composition, which is not going to be based around Roach Ravager, but will be based around Ultras and Zerglings instead. However, in the early to mid part of the game, he's going to be playing heavily with the Roaches. Now, here's a cool move that he does every single game as well that's very easy to implement. Basically, the Terran player has decided that he wants to move across the map, and Nerchio is aware of that when he scouted with those Zerglings and did a little bit of harassment, right? He is aware of the fact that the Terran player is going to be moving out across the map. So what he does is actually he pulls all of the queens from the bases that he has. So keep in mind he had 4 queens prior to this, and basically just adds on 3 new ones. So he's already anticipating him losing those 3 queens, or those 4 queens I guess, and he's already remaking the queens in order to make sure that he can deal with this aggression, and they turn out to be absolutely invaluable. So he's just making non-stop units, adding on a lot of Zerglings right now, adding on more queens, and he's going to be using all of the units that he has to deal with the Terran aggression. Now that a hallmark sign of Nerchio's play is that he's extremely good at engagements. His engagements are top-notch in the fact that he always sets up around, he only really fights on creep, and he only really, deals with the Terran aggression in his own tempo. Like, he only seems to be fighting when the Terran player is as far he's moved as far forward as possible. So right now, for example, these Zerglings and these Roaches and whatnot are all split up, right? So notice the siege tanks. The siege tanks will be doing splash damage, but they will be doing splash damage not to a big clump of units, but only to smaller groups instead. So notice, like, all these little groups moving out. This is something that will just, have to be set up. You have to make sure you're flanking all the time, instead of, like, funneling all your army through this little, alleyway instead, for example. But you gotta make sure that you're surrounding all the time as well. And here's where the aggression comes in. He's using the siege tanks right now, or he's, using the friendly fire of the siege tank to deal with all kinds of aggression. The Terran player will be warded away right here, and while there's still a Liberator in the air, that one also gets shut down. And I believe this is where Nerchio, is going to be winning the game. I believe this is where Nerchio feels, at the very least, at this point in the game, that he's extremely far ahead. But what does he do, right? Since he has a late game focus, he does not actually move out. This is something that fascinates me. Generally speaking, when I would be getting an advantage like this, I would move out, right? I'd be like, okay, I got an advantage, let's go kill him, right? Instead, he drones up. He gets more upgrades, and he's gonna start teching up towards a Hive. One thing to note about Nerchio's play as well is that he, once again, focuses very heavily on late game, and with that, he techs up towards a Hive very quickly. So, this might be something you want to incorporate in your game. While you are dealing with the Terran aggression, and you take a big advantage, instead of trying to finish out the game or doing economic aggression instead, simply just use the time that you've just been given to set up more economy and to set up more tech. So notice, right? At this point in time, he is adding on more and more queens. Now, the queens are there for one simple reason. He's going to be teching up towards a Hive very shortly, and the queens are going to be extremely helpful in both Brood Lord based fights as well as in Ultralisk based fights, because you can use those to transfuse the army that your opponent is going for. So notice right now, right when he's starting +2, he's also starting up the Infestation Pit at 7.5 minutes. And that Infestation Pit is there to try and tech up towards a Hive before the 10-minute mark in the game, right? Now, as you may have noticed, he is moving across the map right here with a handful of Roaches. Those are primarily here for scouting. He doesn't want to sacrifice those, but he's not trying to fight. Now, at the same time, notice where his army positioning is at, right? Because I know a lot of you are struggling with the defense when it comes to Roach Ravager Zergling styles against heavy drop play. Notice the positioning of his army. His army is pretty much everywhere where the Terran player could be dropping. A couple of Ravages here, an extra queen here. We got a Spore Crawler over, well, I guess he moved that over to the front. Normally it would be over in this area over there, but he's moving his army around everywhere to deal with any kind of incoming drops with relative ease. And he's using some of the army to do some scouting and whatnot, but he's not going ahead and taking one very big aggression or one very big engagement here whatsoever. Now, since he did reach the max saturation of the 3 bases, including all of the gases, so all of the gas is going to be taken right now, that is where he starts the heavy amount of units, and also he gets the couple of, he gets the Hive up right now as well. So once again, the Terran player is going for the move out. However, we see another, hallmark sign right here of Nerchio play. he always goes for the Hive, as well as a couple of infestors. In most scenarios, it seems to be that he goes for 2 infestor right when he gets the Hive started. And the infestor, once again, are going to be helpful with the drop play. They're going to be banking up energy to, once again, carry to the late game. And they're going to be great at defending all of the aggression that the Terran player will be throwing at him. So in this particular case, Marinelord, once again, is going to go ahead and move out across the map here. We see an extremely nicely set up flank once more by Nerchio. He's going to be fighting from all different angles. So notice, right? Like, notice the little positioning of all of his army, right? There's little sets of units everywhere. And the supply count isn't lying at this point either. He's just very, very far ahead when it comes to the amount of units. And once the Terran player is overextended and very far onto creep, that is where Nerchio starts taking the engagement and where he once again slams completely over his opponent. Now, what will he do? Will he go ahead and counterattack? I mean, he might move across the map for a little bit, but he's not gonna be committing with his army whatsoever. I mean, as you can see, right? He checks, oh, there's no third base taken over here yet. I don't really need to commit here. I'm not gonna overextend here and take my army to a dangerous position. I'm just simply gonna head back. I know that my Hive will be finishing soon. I'm gonna be going for Ultralisks and Zerglings instead. So he's really not rushing out. He's really not playing very aggressive. He's just playing a very, very safe style, keeping tabs of where the Terran player is gonna be located and what the Terran player's timings are, right? He knows that if he is allowed to play on his own terms and he's allowed to get the army that he wants to in the later stages of the game, he's gonna be a-okay. He doesn't really need to worry about that very much. So he's still got mostly Zerglings and Roaches and Ravagers right now. At this point in the game though, once he hits Hive, which has basically been hit just now, this is basically where he decides to stop making any kind of Roaches. So the Roach Ravager army right now is going to be just a thing of the past. They have been made, they have been useful, but only in very specific scenarios I can imagine him adding on more Roaches. And the simple reason for that is going to be the fact that he gets the Ultralisk Cavern. In this particular game, he gets the Ultralisk Cavern, as well as the Spire at the exact same time. Well, he's got the Spire going up when he started up the Hive, I guess, but he gets the Spire, as well as the Ultralisk Cavern, when he's going for the Hive tech. And this is pretty interesting. Normally, I see players choose only one of two, right? At the very least, like, I myself do this a lot. I go either Spire, Integrated Spire, or I go Ultralisk Cavern. In every single game that Nerchio plays in Zerg vs Terran, he goes for both. Even if he doesn't plan on getting any Corruptor into Brood Lord, or even if he doesn't plan on getting any kind of Ultralisk out, he still goes for both of the tech, just to make sure that it has the potential to switch. And he switches between the two all the time. So he goes for, say, a lot of Corruptor when he sees that his opponent is countering the Ultralisk with a lot of Liberator. At which point, after he counters Liberator, he's going back into Ultralisk in order to deal with the rest of the Terran army. And it's a very cool style. It's a very, very cool way of playing. Now, right now, he is close to being maxed out, so he will need to start trading at least relatively soon, and that's just so he can add on the Ultralisk as well. And also, at this point in the game, he's extremely far ahead, but he needs to deal with, you know, at least some of the Terran's army here in order to also get some of his own. So he actually still adds on a couple of Roaches. I can imagine that is mostly because the Ultralisk Cavern wasn't going to be going on. But either way, he doesn't really focus on any Roaches anymore in a later stage of the game, just because they're going to be inferior to the Ultralisk, and it sort of serve the same purpose in the fact that they are shields for the Zerglings to get closer to the army, and honestly, they're not going to be helping out too much anymore at some later time in the game. So once the Ultralisk finish up, he goes for the chitinous plating instantly, as well as the Ultralisk. And once again, by the way, he still had a lot of army left over. He pulled everything back. He's not trying to close out the game. He's not trying to close out the game whatsoever. He's just sitting back, waiting for the Terran player to move across once again, at which point he can hopefully take a bigger engagement. So once again, we see Marinelord trying to secure this third base. He's even moved over the main command center right now to land at the third. But it's just a very, very stellar style. I mean, once again, more and more units coming in. He is going for the engagements once more when he got the big army. As you can see, he's not adding on any more Roaches right now. He's focusing on a lot of Corruptor, as well as Zerglings, as well as Ultralisk now instead. So the Ultralisk are out, and Marinelord is forced to GG out. Alrighty, game number 2 is going to be on New Gettysburg. Now, both of these maps are new ones. However, the last one that we just saw on the Sun Station that map is considered to be a little bit more tricky for Zerg. I mean, there's a lot of droppable locations, there's a lot of, you know, tough chokes and whatnot for Zerg to engage into, and more often than not, New Gettysburg is going to be the map where Nerchio will be allowed to play a little bit greedier. However, if you have a look at his playstyle, it is still extremely similar. He goes for the hatch, he goes for the gas, and he goes for the spawning pool. Now, there's one very minor deviation that I don't know if you want to implement in your game, depending on the league that you're playing at, but he goes a little bit more drone heavy at the third base. Other than that, the playstyle is still exactly the same. He's not going to be doing any scouting, really. He's gonna just be simply allowed to tech towards the late game, and he's defending all of the Terran aggression with the handful of units that he makes. So as you can see, he pulls 2 drones out of gas, he goes for the 4 links here, he goes for the, you know, the 4 queens as soon as possible as well, and once the Zergling speed got started, he pulls 2 drones out of gas and only starts mining with a single one, just to get the minerals a little bit faster and go for the third base. So remember, when he gets the full saturation in the natural, right now he's got at 17 out of 16 drones, that is where he adds on the third base here, and he also goes for the Roach Warren as well as the Evolution Chamber as a short follow-up. While the Zergling speed finished up, he added on 4 more Zerglings. He also then adds the drones back into the gas geyser, and this is where we see the slight deviation happen. So remember in the previous game, this is where the Terran player was going for that Widow Mine drop shenanigans, and he was forced to deal with that, and eventually he got himself a lot of drones out. He was actually saving up for a little while to slam out a bunch of roaches. In this particular game, he sees that Marinelord decided to go for Hellions instead, and he's droning up right from the get-go. He's like, alright, I don't really need to worry about this. I got 2 queens, I got 8 Zerglings, I can deal with any kind of Hellion shenanigans easily. With the creep spread that he has right now, it shouldn't be that hard, and he goes ahead and makes on a lot more workers here, instead of getting the roaches out as soon as he possibly can. Now, the funny thing is that he just got a handful of drones here extra, right? And it does add on rather quickly here, but he still goes for the 7 roaches here no matter what. Now, if you look at the amount of scouting that he has done, and by the way, this is where he starts running up that third again. If you look at the amount of scouting that he has done at this point in the game, he's done very little. He did poke in with the Overlord a little bit further on, but he's not really seen the natural, he's not really seen the third command center go down, he's not really seen a whole lot. And for that very reason, he's gonna just be playing his own style, right? He's gonna be doing the exact same thing. Now, for the moment, he is going to be droning up the third base as heavily as he possibly can. And as you can see, once he hits full saturation, which is basically right now, he actually is a couple drones short of a full saturation. But either way, he's gonna go ahead and start making a big amount of roaches, just because he's pretty much blind at this point in the game, right? He has not seen a whole lot, he doesn't really have a whole lot of scouting information, and while he does check out right now what is going on, he checks for the third base, he finds out that the third base is going on, and that is where he continues droning up, and he gets the third base saturation. Once again, though, we see that second evolution chamber being added on a little bit later, and before even starting up the +2 armor, that is where Nerchio starts up the infestation pit. So once again, a very late game focused game here, where he is trying to tech up towards the Hive as soon as possible. He's not moving across the map other than with a couple of packs of Zerglings, and he's fighting on his own creep. And this is something really important. He's just only fighting on his own terms. He's never really engaging in terrible scenarios. On top of that, he's got a lot of added extra queens to deal with any kind of aggression and, you know, shoo away those medevacts, but to more importantly also deal with any kind of, you know, creep spread that got delayed or that got destroyed. Like, he's spreading creep absolutely everywhere, and it makes the defending aspect of the game so much easier. Once again, defending in multiple places at once, splitting up his army continuously, and making sure that he got vision of all of the dropships that could be heading towards his main base. Just look at the minimap, right? Look how much vision he has. It's absolutely insane. At this point in the game, I'm pretty sure that Nerchio once again feels pretty confident about his capabilities. Anyway, the Hive is going down. We see the 2 infestors already out on the map. Once again, we see the 2 of them. And this is also when he starts droning up the fort base a little bit. So generally speaking, he gets about a half saturation in the fort base, also because he moves drones over from the main to watch the fort. And here is actually where we see a slight little mistake from Nerchio. So remember when I said that he wasn't ever moving across the map? Well, right now he is. He is actually moving across the map a little bit, and I'm pretty sure these are just a couple of nerfs kicking in for Nerchio, because he doesn't do this in any of the other Zerg vs Terran games he plays in. you will be able to notice very shortly, and while he does engage relatively well here and everything wasn't lost just yet, it wasn't a good engagement after all. I mean, he got some reasonable traits here, but it was just a risk, right? It wasn't necessary. So instead, he just sits back, he gets the Hive up, he gets the +1 melee upgrade here once again, and once the Hive finishes up, he will be going for both Brood Lords as well as the Ultralisk Cavern, but once again, he only fights on his own terms. He replaces creep tumors that are going to be lost, he gets the Adrenal Glands upgrade as well as the Ultralisk Cavern, and he's just simply starting to prepare for that late game switch, without really, you know, allowing himself to get too far, you know, off track, I guess. He's just setting up the engagements, trying to get the perfect engagement once again, setting up those flanks, making sure that the siege tanks do not get their perfect engage or like their perfect hits off, and make sure that the splash damage of the siege tanks is gonna go on top of the Marines instead of you know, the Zerg army. Now, once again, does he move across the map here? He does not. Instead of trying to push the engagement here and tries to get ahead, he just simply waits. He knows he's got upgrades coming in. He knows he got the Ultralisk Cavern coming in, so there's no particular reason for him to move out across the map. He just simply replaces the creep tumors that have been lost, and he starts adding on a much bigger army. Now, this game is going to go on for a little while longer because Marinelord does manage to hold on for a little bit, and I wanted to show you this because in the late game, he does do some pretty cool moves as well. First and foremost, the move that he goes for in the late game situation in Zerg vs Terran is the Nidus network. Now, in this particular game, and this is actually a series of games, right? So this is a little bit of a mind game here. But in this particular game, Nerchio doesn't even do anything with the Nidus worm. I mean, he threatens with it. He puts up the Nidus worm right here, I believe in the main base in shortly. Yeah, there we go. And this is just to sort of try to get the Terran to unsiege and at the very least run a bunch of the army away. If you're going up against weaker Terran players, just simply putting up a Nidus in the main base may very well trigger them to unsiege all the tanks and liberators, at which point you can just overrun them, right? This particular case though, you can see Marinelord is gonna head towards the main base, and as you can imagine, I mean, a couple of units come out, but they're like, nope, not gonna really risk it at all. And at this point, since he is going to be maxed out, he is using the time that he just bought himself with the Nidus worm to move across the map with the rest of the army. Now, is he moving across the map here to sacrifice this army? Kind of, in a way, but he's trying to get rid primarily here of all of the roaches. The reason for it is rather simple. He is right now, you know, supply blocked. He's at a max amount of supply, and he's got a lot of his army sitting in Roach Ravager. I mean, right here, I don't know exactly how much this is, but this is going to be roughly about 70-ish supply in Roach Ravager. That is not going to be a very, you know, supply efficient army in the late game. So he's trying to get rid of some of the army here, but most importantly, he's trying to just simply slow down the Terran player a little bit. So a whole bunch of Marines or a whole bunch of SCVs ended up falling there. As you can see, a whole lot of the workers have been killed. And he's not overextending though. He's not going to really be overextending here. He's just simply trying to slow down the Terran player. Now, was it a good choice? Hard to say. But in the end, he still managed to do quite a little bit of work because of the Ultralisk Cavern in the main base once more as well. Now, one cool thing that maybe some of you Zerg players have been struggling with as well is the transition toward Ghost. In the late game, it seems like Terran has two options. They either go Ghost or they go for Liberator play. Liberator play used to be the standard for the longest time. However, in a recent patch, Ghost got changed up a little bit. And right now, they are pretty prevalent in the late game Zerg versus Terran matchup. In order to deal with the Ghost in every single game, he goes for the centrifugal hooks in the Banelings. The Banelings are extremely helpful in taking out you know, the Ghost. And I actually haven't been playing this whatsoever myself. I've been struggling against Ghost, but something as simple as Banelings could easily be the fix to this issue. So as you can see, he continues onwards with the Ultralisk, he continues onwards with the Infestor as well as the Zerglings, not adding on any more Roaches, and not really spending any more gas here on Ravagers either. He's just simply trying to get a bigger army while getting, once again, both of the tech pads. So he's going for both the Spire and the Greater Spire, and he's trying to simply just get the biggest army that he can that deals with the Terran's aggression. Once again though, is he trying to engage as soon as he possibly can? No, he's not. He's trying to bait the Terran on creep as far as possible while setting up big flanks to potentially deal with all of the Terran aggression. And once again, once this comes into play, once he gets this sick engagement off, he is once again just going to be able to overrun the Terran player while he's just slowly but surely chipping away at this game. Now, while these engagements were all a little bit rougher, while the Terran player is turtled up pretty heavily with a lot of Liberator and a lot of planetary fortresses, Nerchio is once again just going to be returning. He's doing Ling run-bys all the time, but I think the main thing to take away from this is that he's not really overextending. He's just trying to fight on his own terms while getting the sickest amounts of upgrades. And as you can see, at this point in the game, the Corruptors are out, the Greater Spire is done. And once again, he's trying to take the engagement on the, positioning that he likes. The army has been split up. He's going to be able to go for the Greater Spire units very shortly. There we see the Brood Lords go down. At the same time, we see the Nidus network once more in the main base, forcing at least a part of the Terran player's army to be split off. And he's going to be knocking down the Nidus worm here just to deal with any kind of aggression. Now, eventually, that Overlord does get sniped there. A little bit unfortunate, but the army is slowly but surely transitioning towards an army based around Corruptors, Zerglings, Banelings, Brood Lords, as well as a couple of infestors. Eventually, if it goes to the really late game, there's like one very long match as well. Besides just the infestor spellcaster, he's also adding on more queens in the late game, and those queens are going to be extremely helpful. As you can see, there's a couple out here already, but he adds on significantly more to also transfuse the army. Now, at this point in the game, he is going to be maxed out. He doesn't really want to fight here, I don't think, but he doesn't really want the Terran to set up a super defensive position either. And, I mean, since he's got this many units anyway, he's just going to be capable of rolling over whatever the Terran player will be able to throw at him. Once again, though, instead of transitioning towards a super, or like instead of moving out across the map and playing super aggressive, he's sitting back, slowly but surely progressing. So long story short, Nerchio plays the same game very, very, very often. He tries to get a very big lead in the early part of the game by not moving across the map, but to simply just soak up all of the aggression that the Terran player is going for. He basically doesn't do any scouting. He prioritizes things such as creep spread over scouting. And speaking of which, he has a lot of extra queens to deal with any kind of potential Terran, aggression. And he's replacing all of the creep tumors. His game is extremely late game focused. He's trying to deal with all of the aggression while slowly but surely teching up towards this Hive army. And this is his ultimate army here. This is the army that he eventually is trying to go for. That will be basically unstoppable by the Terran player. He goes for a very fast infestation pit because of that, and he is going for a relatively slow, relatively slow amount of upgrades. Like a lot of Zerg players, in particular in Korea, seem to focus a lot more on the infestation pit or on the evolution chamber upgrades instead. So they go for really quick double upgrades. Nerchio instead focuses on tech instead. When he takes a big engagement, instead of counter-attacking, he just simply sits back and techs up a little bit faster, or he gets another base going and goes for a bunch of drones a little bit faster. So instead of taking a risk, he just simply sits there and waits. He just waits for him to get the ultimate army up, at which point he slowly but surely progresses towards, the victory. And that is where this game is going to be decided as well. And I'm going to speed it up a little bit more, just because we have been watching all of it. We may as well complete it to the very end. But as you can imagine, at this point, the Zerg army is just very, very, very big. And it's going to be very tough for the Terran player to really deal with it. Once more, though, he's not risking anything. He's just playing extremely safe, playing extremely defensively. And he's ideally waiting here for the Terran player to engage on his own creep. Now, since the creep is basically extended towards the Terran's bases at this point, he can definitely start moving across the map, and that's exactly what he's doing. Once he realizes that most of the Terran army is going to be just a couple of Marines and a couple of Vikings. I mean, at this point, he obviously realizes that this is going to be a very straightforward victory. But at this point, he's just still playing very safe. He's not risking anything, right? Now, obviously, you can imagine that once fungals like that start landing, and we saw all those prior engagements as well, things go in his favor very, very quickly. So hopefully this taught you a little bit about how to play the Zerg vs Terran matchup very passively, very defensively, until you can roll over your Terran opponent. And other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!